Good morning, everybody. Good morning, it's JPR, and welcome back to another video. A few months ago, we learned that instead of a traditional enhanced version, like Pokemon Gun, as many people were anticipating, that we would be getting an expansion pass Pokemon Sword and Shield for the price of $30. And because it's 2020 and Game Freak can't make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich without causing controversy, naturally there was quite a polarized reaction to this. Now, I may have been one of the only PokeTubers in existence who didn't make a video cashing out on the whole National Dex debacle, which I regret heavily. But since the games are already out and this topic interests me a little bit more, I figured I may as well take a stab at it, weigh some pros and cons of the expansion pass versus the traditional enhanced versions, and maybe also uncover some of the reasons why this move has been so divisive among fans. So let me just start by getting my personal opinion out of the way. I think DLC is the way to go regardless of how it turns out. Enhanced versions are a largely dated concept that I personally don't believe should exist in 2020, at least for Pokemon. There are still some games, like Persona 5 Royal, which are enhancements to the original game, where they tend to come out years after the initial release and add substantial amounts of content to the game. Pokemon's enhanced versions, even the very best ones, generally come out 1 to 2 years after the initial release and only tweak a few things here and there, mostly refining content rather than changing anything major about the story. And we already saw how the Pokemon fanbase reacted and discussed to the Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon enhanced versions in 2017. Although I personally enjoyed these titles quite a bit, I have to admit they didn't have much of a valid reason to exist in 2017. I think it would have made people much happier if these were just downloadable New Game Plus for the base Sun and Moon. Though Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon's biggest mistake was being 2 versions to begin with. At least with Yellow, Crystal, Emerald, and Platinum, all the new content was right there in one game. But if you wanted to truly experience all the new content that came from the Ultra games, then that's a very hefty $70 that you'll have to drop on a game that you've basically already played. Also, still having to deal with version exclusives in an enhanced version is a pain. I literally just want a blue shirt, Game Freak. Again, a singular Pokemon Eclipse version could have gotten the job done, but that's still not as good of an option as DLC in my opinion. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's take a look at what we know about Pokemon Sword and Shield's expansion pass so far. We know that we'll be getting 2 brand new wild area-like locations in the form of the Isle of Armor and the Crown Tundra. This is definitely a good start, but I'm not going to get too excited until we know exactly what goes down in these new areas. The base wild area in Sword and Shield is a pretty great addition, I will admit, but very rough around the edges. Not just graphically, but also in terms of what you can actually do there. You get max raid battles, shaking berry trees, fishing, and that's about it. More than anything else, I wish there were just more locations within the wild area to interact with, like small caves or forests you could find and explore, or that old tower out there. Instead of it just being a place that ghost Pokemon gather around, make it an actual location with depth, a place that we can go inside and explore, not just a pillar sticking out of the ground with grass around it. Routes not having depth is an issue that I think plagues most of the areas in Sword and Shield, but it's definitely the most noticeable in the wild area in my opinion. Now, in the expansion pass trailer, we've already seen caves, beaches, and ancient temples, which is interesting, but please let us be able to interact with these different environments in some way. Let me tell you now, if I just waltz up to the temple door and it plays a cutscene where Regigigas jumps down and starts a battle, I will be heated. We also know that we'll be able to go into the Pokemon dens in these areas and explore underneath, but how far will they go with that? Will it just be a room or two with Pokemon and items in it, or an actual labyrinth to explore and get lost in? Again, I like what we've seen, but until we know the extent of it, I'll keep my hopes low. Anyway, going back to the issue of depth in Galar, this is where I feel like an enhanced version would have shined over the expansion pass. While it's great that we're getting 2 massive new wild areas, it seems quite unlikely that they'll change anything about mainland Galar's routes and wild area. In past enhanced versions, some routes have been changed to allow for a little more explorability, or just new areas in general have been added to open up the map. By far, more than anything else, the biggest issue with Galar is how straightforward and boring 90% of the routes are. The most explorable area in the game is Route 2, for crying out loud. I forget who said this, but I remember about a month ago seeing a post on Twitter claim that the second route in Black 2 and White 2 has more depth to it than any of the routes in Galar. And honestly, that's just a fact. You have different types of grass, there are areas you can only explore during certain seasons, there are entirely new areas of the route that open up after getting Surf and Waterfall. This is a multi-layered Pokemon route at its finest. Galar routes have little to none of this. They're mostly just straightforward paths with no puzzles or any reason to ever come back. Sure, you could blame the removal of HMs and seasons, but even without those things, in the past the routes looked way better than this. Beyond just that, enhanced versions usually beef up gym leaders and other notable trainers teams to make the experience a bit more challenging for veterans, which again, is something I think the expansion pass won't touch on. So sadly, if you found the routes bland or the gym challenge to be quite easy, it's unlikely that these issues will ever be fixed, as all the resources are going into the new content rather than refining anything old. These are just a couple of areas where I think an enhanced version would have done better. But there is one other big talking point to this discussion, and that of course is the new Pokemon, some being Gigantamax forms, some being Galarian forms like Slowpoke, and some being entirely new creations like Urshifu and Calyrex. Here, undoubtedly, the expansion pass reigns superior. Based on past trends, we know Game Freak never patches in new Pokemon to past games from that same generation. The new Giratina and Shaman forms introduced in Platinum weren't put in Diamond and Pearl, the Therian forms and Keldeo Resolute were never added to Black and White, the Hoenn Remake Mega Evolutions were never patched into X and Y, and even in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, the new Ultra Beast and Zeraora are completely incompatible with the base Sun and Moon. This has always sucked. It just makes trading and battling between games of the same generation more troublesome than it needs to be. It may not have been that bad for Sun and Moon or Black and White owners, but whenever a large amount of new forms like the 20 ORAS Mega Evolutions are introduced, problems arise quite frequently for people who were stuck with the first games in the generation. And we already know there's going to be a lot of additions in this expansion pass, possibly a dozen new Galarian forms, brand new legendaries and mythicals, and of course, Gigantamax forms. This would not have worked as an enhanced version under any circumstances. It would have been nearly impossible to communicate between Sword and Shield and Pokemon Gun, or whatever you want to call it. So with that out of the way, why are some fans upset about the expansion pass? Could it be that Game Freak, those cunning sinners, are planning to sell the National Pokédex back to the fans a bit at a time for a ridiculous amount of money? Well, no. The extra 200 Pokemon added to the game are not a part of the $30 expansion pass. While it's true that you can only catch these 200 Pokemon on the new islands added by the expansion pass, you can still get these Pokemon in your game through Pokemon Home. So while it makes for a good conspiracy theory, Game Freak selling the National Dex back to the fans is simply not true. The old Pokemon editions are all free. More likely, people are upset because of how quickly all this new content was revealed. The revelation of the expansion pass and all this new content, and believe me, it is a lot of new content, was all revealed only 54 days after launch, less than 2 months later. This led a lot of people into thinking that Game Freak purposely withheld this post-game content to sell as an expansion all along, whereas past Pokemon games like Diamond and Pearl and Black and White had lengthy post-games even without enhanced versions and or sequels. And you know what? This is a valid complaint. Judging by how much content they seem to have already done in a short amount of time, one would think they could have just delayed the games in order to implement a proper post-game experience rather than selling it as DLC. But on the other hand, this is a practice that is already done by multiple other gaming studios. Almost all AAA games nowadays have some sort of paid content that you could argue should have been in the base game all along. Again, I think the only major difference is how fast Game Freak and the Pokemon Company revealed this all to the public. If they had given us the exact same direct in March or April of this year rather than early January, I doubt nearly as many people would have been mad. I personally can't tell you why they decided to show this off so early. Maybe they were afraid the games would flop because of the National Dex controversy, and so they pushed out a direct promising more content soon. But these games sold absolutely fine. More than fine, actually. They could have already become the second best-selling Nintendo Switch games ever by this point. So it is a puzzling decision, but that's all I can really say about it. Regardless, I am glad that Game Freak has finally transitioned to DLC rather than making us pay $60 to play the same game over again with minor tweaks and updates. Like I mentioned earlier in the video, there are some things that enhanced versions could do better, like improving the general route design or bumping up the difficulty a notch. But as a whole, I would say there's more pros here than cons, and who knows, maybe someday we will get a New Game Plus feature like so many other RPGs have. That's my hope anyway. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this one. I'll see you guys next time.